Ever since the early 90s, Tom Baker has wanted to return to the role of the Doctor, and, he has here and there, but for the longest time, he didn't even want to do Big Finish. But, as we all know, in 2011 he appeared as the Doctor in the Big Finish Lost Stories 4th Doctor box set, and then later had his own series in 2012, which is currently on its 8th season, as of 2019, and not just with a 9th, but a 10th one penned in for 2020 and 2021, respectively. Not to mention all of the projects that Tom Baker has done for Big Finish across the years. However, people forget that Tom Baker reprised his role for the Doctor since Logopolis, and before Big Finish. 90s stuff aside. Now, here's a bit of a history lesson. Audio Go were publishers who did all of the BBC's Doctor Who audio material, including novelisation readings, newly made audiobooks just for audio, missing episode soundtracks, and even Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood material. However, this was in 2010, so this is a bit after when we're talking about, but I don't know, it says that they're the publishers of this on the TARDIS wiki page, so that's what I'm going with. So, before Audio Go, it was basically just BBC Audio that made all this material.
Audio Go only came in because they bought out BBC Audio.
And in 2009, they made a series where Tom Baker reprised the role of the Doctor. Tom did have a say in how these stories went, even suggesting that the Doctor lived in a cottage in Sussex. Paul Morris was to write these stories. He's mainly known for his BBC books, which were typically more comedic in tone, and for creating Iris Wildtime. Big Finish fans will recognise the name, as he wrote the Auntie Pat stories in the first 2 series of the 8th Doctor and Lucy Miller adventures. 3 seasons of these 4th Doctor audios were made, all consisting of 5 episodes each episode about an hour long, each season coming out the subsequent year. Hornet's Nest was the first of these seasons, and that's what I'll be reviewing today. So stick around to find out what I think and if it's worth seeking out. So before I begin, let's look at the packaging. Now, I don't usually do this, but seeing as how I feel like I'm the only person on YouTube who's actually reviewed this series, I feel obliged to. So the cover art doesn't actually feature the classic series logo, but is in fact the diamond logo from the Tom Baker era. The font used for most of the text is Della Robbia, which is the font used in the title sequence and end credits from Season 14 to Season 17. And Hornet's Nest is set explicitly between Season 15 and 16. The back of this release is similar to all BBC audio releases. This is where you can initially look at the cast list. The inside booklets have letters and news clippings from the continuity of the story, as well as a cast list similar to the Radio Times, which Big Finish did originally, as well as a picture of the Doctor from the cover art with a quote from Paul Mars, as well as more admin stuff with other BBC audio products listed. Anyways, now I've channeled my inner host productions, time for me to channel my inner stew bag full, as now it's actually time to review this. Now, the stuff of nightmares comes first, and I've got things to talk about. It starts off with Mike seeing a job advert for someone who fits his description and his description alone. Retired army captain, fine with scientific advice, no stuff about giant maggots and so on. He arrives at Nest's cottage, being greeted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Wibsey. Not a very nice old lady, who tells him that he's late. He finds out that the resident of the cottage is the Doctor, who wants him to help with an investigation he's going through. You see, across England, stuffed animals are coming to life and are killing important figures. One even attacked the Doctor at the dinner table when him and Mike were getting reacquainted. The story is sort of like a companion chronicle from Big Finish, to begin with, as Mike recounts the experience he had leading up to the Doctor telling his story. Then it acts more as a conversation between the Doctor and Mike, even though Mike doesn't say much. I have nothing wrong with this style, as I do love companion chronicles, but the difference is that there is no background music nor sound effects. So this is essentially just a glorified audiobook, which is a style continued throughout these audios. This made it a little difficult to listen to, as sometimes I zoned out when listening. It also doesn't help when I'm on a bus with ambient traffic noise outside and with primary school children behind me screaming about Fortnite or something. As for the story itself, spoiler warning from here on out, it's actually pretty decent. Although the actual plot is very simple, it hinges on concept and character. These are strong points for writer Paul Marks. When we find out what's controlling the animals, we find out that their brains are actually origami, and act as a nest for the Hornets, which act as the main villain of this arc. The characters are also engaging. The character of Mr. Noggins, portrayed by the guy that played Chris in Shada, is characterized as a weak-willed wimp, but understandably human. His motivations are reasonable. He even regrets teaming up with the Hornets by the end and disagrees with their methods. The only other character I should touch on is the Doctor himself. I'm not sure what to think of him. I'm listening to the series after listening to the comic strip adaptations from Big Finish, and I honestly think that the latter is a better representation of who 4 is. He can be serious, but he's more jovial. Here, he can be jovial, but he's more serious. He does still feel like the 4th Doctor, although that may just be the fact that Tom Baker just simply is the 4th Doctor, even when he isn't acting. And it does make sense in context. I don't know, it just feels weird. Overall, this is a decent start to the range, but the sound design took me out a little. If it didn't, I would give this an 8 out of 10, but as it stands, I would give this specific audio a 7. Next up is The Dead Shoes. Mike was wondering about the dancing shoes he was going to use to defend himself last episode, when the animals came to life again. So the Doctor recalls the tale. Basically, he went to check up on Mr. Noggins' grandmother, Ernestina, to see what her connection to the whole Hornet business is. He ends up finding her in a museum ran by Mrs. Wibsey, before Ernestina steals the shoes which acted as an exhibit. Now, I'm making this sound way too convenient, but Paul Mars does a decent job at making this seem more natural. Okay, this is a poor choice of words, seeing as how the shoes are possessed, but you get what I mean. The Doctor with a recently saved Ernestina go back to the museum and encounter Mrs. Wibsey, who is in league with the Hornets. These Hornets claim to have met the Doctor before, about 100 years prior, while the Doctor hasn't experienced this yet. The Hornets can also manipulate matter, and as she's in league with them, Mrs. Wibsey can also do this as well. So she shrinks them down and puts them in a doll's house. The toy inhabitants of the house come to life, much like the stuffed animals in the previous episode, and try to attack the pair. They do escape, and no joke, the Doctor uses a sonic screwdriver to return them to normal size. We do find out that Mrs. Wibsey is reluctant to work with the Hornets. They proceed to control Ernestina to put on the dance shoes again, and they try to get her to jump off the edge of the pier again. It wasn't clear why they were doing this, but as I was writing the script, it hit me. They can only control dead matter, as human will is too strong for them to fully control, as the willpower can resist them. After the ordeal, Mrs. Wibsey agrees with the Doctor that being in the 21st century will be more beneficial to defeat the Hornets, as all the things that the Hornets have possessed, being in one place, is more beneficial so they don't have control over history. So this explains Mrs. Wibsey and why she's at Next Cottage. Question is, why haven't I spoken about Mike much? Well, due to the style of these audios acting more as a glorified audiobook, he doesn't get to do much, which I found disappointing, as he's got second billing on all of these audios. Even the Reverend in this story got more lines. Speaking of the style, I was getting more used to it, as I wasn't zoning out as much, and I was much more invested in the plot, but I can't say I'm a fan of it. Overall, solid continuation. I'll also give this a 7 out of 10. The Circus of Doom is up next. Basically, the Doctor goes back to find out where the shoes actually came from. But first, he makes a stop at the shop to top up his supply of confectionaries, despite jelly babies admittedly not being invented yet. He finds out that a circus is in town from the shopkeeper, and it turns out it is a circus of doom. People start to go missing after going to the Circus of Delights, and a local doctor wants to save his sister, Francesca, who turns out to be the bearded lady that's working with the vertically challenged ringleader. Now, I'm sure you can guess that the Hornets have something to do with this, and they do, which we actually find out early on. In case you're wondering, the shoes belong to Francesca, who the Doctor knows he can't save because time stuff. He still gave it a shot, but failed because time stuff. Now, there's an important part of the plot which really changes the game. Antonio, the ringleader, explains how he came to meet the Hornets. Back when he was 13, in 1768, he stole a boat and came to an island, and saw something appear out of thin air, which inspired him to join the circus. This something was the TARDIS, but the Hornets came out of it. This scares the Doctor and had me interested in the next part. Again, Mike is hardly in this. However, unlike other stories, there is good sound design which helped me get invested a bit more. Unfortunately, although I preferred this premise, I was less invested in the actual drama. Overall, other than the pilot, this was better, but if the plot was at the same level as the others, it would be an 8. 7 out of 10 yet again. Right, so A Sting in the Tail is the next one. The Doctor recalls heading back to Northumbria in 1039, and he is chased down by wolves, but escapes to an abbey where nuns are worshipping their Mother Superior. Said divine being turns out to be a pig with weird eyes. The pig actually contains some hornets, including their queen, which is why the wolves are trying to get at her, as they're possessed by hornets as well. The Doctor then leaves, but accidentally lets the head of the wolf pack, being newly possessed by the queen, into the TARDIS. There's a lot of chasing, which is somewhat reminiscent of the Invasion of Time, before the Doctor temporarily gets possessed. The Hornets possess living matter differently to dead matter. They have full control over the dead, but the living still have consciousness. They just have hornets wriggling inside of them. We see this with the Wolf and the Doctor, so they control the Doctor to bring him to Venice in 1768, and this is where the events surrounding Antonio occur. We then cut back to present day. The Doctor has no more stories to tell. Mrs. Wibsey says that everything's safe, but it turns out every animal in the house is now possessed. There's not really much to say on this one that I haven't already said in the others. I guess something I've not mentioned yet is that I do like the backdrops each episode has had. Industrial modern, seaside town, circus, now Snowy Hill. Paul Morris knows how to set scenes, which is clear from this, as well as the work I've experienced from him on Big Finish. The wormery being set in an interdimensional bar sticks to mind. Again, the imagery in this makes it feel like the ending of it takes you away, but 5-hour-long episodes. However, because of how Mars deals with time, how it works, and the hard rules it creates, it started to become predictable how everything linked together. Which is a shame, as I was hooked when I listened to the end of the last one. I can't really add much more, other than I didn't find the plot as engaging. 6 out of 10. Finally, we have Hive of Horror, and... Yes! Yes! Mike finally has something to do in this story! So after an anticlimactic resolution to A Sting in the Tail, the Doctor takes Mike and Mrs. Wibsey, shrinks them down, and climbs into a stuffed zebra's ear, as that is where the Queen of the Hive is. We actually see the Queen try to persuade Mike to join them, which is certainly a callback to the invasion of the dinosaurs. Other than this, not a great deal happens. The Doctor and Mrs. Wibsey do get locked up for a bit, but because the brain is made out of papier-mâché, yes, not origami now, the Doctor lights a match. The Doctor stops the Queen by shrinking her down into the quantum realm or something. I can't say I'm not satisfied with this conclusion, because I am, but I'm unsatisfied with the content of the episode. It was a nice subversion of expectations for the Queen to focus on Mike, as well as have this be somewhat of a character piece. The setting does make sense as well, but for an alien race hell-bent on trying to take over the planet, the episode does not feel like these villainous Vespidae, who are vindicated for vexatious ventriloquy, who very much want victory, are actually what they've been built up to be. And yes, I just decided to write alliteration in the script because I was bored. But this was still an enjoyable enough listen. I would still give it a 7 out of 10. Overall, I'm not sure if I can recommend Hornet's Nest. Each episode, if it weren't for the out there concepts, would have just felt a bit samey. The main issue in this series is that it sets up a lot of things that don't get delivered upon. Just like the Ghost Monument, come to think about it. I found this Chekhov's gun-esque problem to be at its worst in Hive of Horror, where Mike realises that he has the Brigadier's old whiskey, which could have been effective against the Hornets, as we realise that they can't take over living beings who have been intoxicated in A Sting in the Tail. But nothing's done with this? Paul Mars writes the Fourth Doctor in a way that makes sense to write him. He's all joking and relishes an adventure, but as a narrator of a story he's deadly serious. The Fourth Doctor was known to have more serious moments, but it's jarring when you mostly hear him in a serious tone, because he's not mostly serious. Although, I did get more used to it in the latter half of the series, and I'm guessing it's because Tom did too, as this was the first time since Destiny of the Doctors where he recorded new material for the Fourth Doctor. Well, explicitly. Back onto Mars's writing. His outlandish concepts are well known if you know anything about the expanded media. Even his least divisive story has a Zygon as an ex-rock star, so really all of the stuff in this series isn't too much of a surprise coming from the writer. I do actually like this stuff, and Paul Mars does do a good job in making all the stuff seem mundane to the Doctor, which I can really applaud. But I do understand why people in a Facebook group that I'm a part of said that, yeah, you should only really buy this if you can stand Paul Mars's writing. Even I know that it's not for everyone. Another thing that I've said throughout this review that I do consider a problem is the lack of Mike. Going in, I thought Mike was going to be in each adventure with the Doctor and Mrs. Wibsey. Now, when I read the cast list for each episode, I realised that Mrs. Wibsey wasn't in all of them, which made me think it'd just be the Doctor and Yates. I was disappointed in the stuff of Nightmares, and increasingly got more disappointed as the series went on, because just like the Brigadier's Whiskey, the series sort of gives off a false advertisement vibe, as Mike is on most of the covers and gets second billing. I can understand why, as Richard Franklin is probably the second most valuable and recognisable cast member, as he acts as another incentive to fans, as not only do they have Tom Baker to fangasm over, but also Captain Mike Yates from the Pertwee era. Speaking of, this series just seems to be tailor-made for people with 70s Who nostalgia. But not exactly in a way that's reminiscent of the era, yet also not in a modern way either. I'm not actually sure how to describe this. Also, the audiobook format took some getting used to. Even though I, just like many people, love the sound of Tom Baker's voice, it does get a little bit hard to concentrate with no background music. A companion chronicle, this is not. Now that I've critiqued the writing, let's critique the characters. I've already mentioned the Fourth Doctor and how I did end up enjoying his performance, if a little jarring at times, so I'll just skip over to Mike. Richard Franklin as Mike does an excellent job when he was in it. Although I feel Mike was just there for the Doctor's narration to make narrative sense, and for the last episode to have more dramatic weight when the Hornets were trying to take him over. And when I say dramatic weight, I mean false dramatic weight. Susan Jameson as Mrs. Wibsey was interesting. It's refreshing for the Doctor to hang around a mean, doddery old lady instead of, well, not that. And it was nice to see her open up in the last episode. The Hornets as a villain. They were bland and uninteresting. Gosh, the Series 11 parallels get more and more common. If it weren't for the fact that they were a recurring villain throughout the arc, I'd probably completely forget about them. They're just bees who want to invade the Earth, because they're a Doctor Who monster. Of course they want to invade the Earth. At least the Valeyard, another primary villain in a whole series arc. He had personality. He had connections to the Doctor that no other villain had. He had a unique ambition. The Hornets just control matter, animate or inanimate, just cause they want to invade the Earth for no reason. There is one good thing about them. The more the Doctor meets them, the less they know about him, as he's going backwards in time. That's pretty neat, and predates the Moffat era by a whole year, but then again, Riversong as a character predated this by yet another year, so I would say this was an enjoyable experience, and I don't regret listening to this. It's interesting to experience a piece of Doctor Who that not many people actually talk about. However, if this sort of thing isn't your cup of tea, don't get it. But if you're curious, like I was, I recommend giving it a shot. So that does it for my review of Hornet's Nest. If you've listened to it, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Follow the Whoniversals on Twitter. Like our Facebook page. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me on Twitter. What other things can I plug? Also, just check the description. I'm not sure how many people do check the description, but check the description, because, like, we actually credit the people behind the title sequence, like, in the description of every video with these title sequences in them. So I recommend just checking the description. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video. Take care now.